One Sunday morning, my mom's friend, whom I called Aunt Helen, came to visit us. Aunt Helen was an older woman, but no less pretty. She had black hair, a medium build, and an oval face. Her skin was smooth, and she had a warmth about her that made her utterly charming. That's exactly how I could describe her. I didn't take English lessons, but she was pretty good at it. I had my own difficulties with the language, and she often helped me with it, which made her visits both exciting and nerve-wracking for me. Aunt Helen and my mother talked for quite a long time, and it must be said, quite loudly. Aunt Helen always had a confident voice that carried throughout the room. They chatted and laughed, and it seemed like they had learned a lot. As she was about to say goodbye, Aunt Helen turned to me and asked, "Liam, you're coming to my class today, aren't you?" I nodded affirmatively, feeling a little nervous. "Great. We have one of our most important lessons today," she said with a smile. She was a little playful. She always had this weird way of talking to me, even from the very first class. My mom just laughed at her behavior. She seemed to be amused by the way Aunt Helen treated me. On the afternoon of that day, I went to her house. It was a cozy little apartment. It seemed to me like it was filled with little treasures and memories that gave it a special mood. "Come on in, Liam. Sit down and have a seat," she said warmly as she led me into the living room. The living room had a glass coffee table and a white leather couch that I already remembered from previous visits. Several paintings of picturesque landscapes hung on the wall, adding to the room's tranquility. We sat down and Aunt Helen handed me a notebook and some papers, after which we began to explore. In the process, I began to notice something strange again. Aunt Helen was looking at me with a smile, her eyes lingering on me in some unusual way. She would touch my arm or shoulder in some unnatural way, and it made me feel uncomfortable. I began to suspect that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Then, as we were doing one exercise, she suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Do you really want to know? Do you want me to tell you straight?" she asked, her voice softer, almost teasing. The tone made me wary, but I nodded and said yes, even though I wasn't entirely sure what she meant. "Have you ever had a girlfriend, Liam?" she asked, looking at me intently. I turned my head to the side, feeling awkward. That simple gesture meant that I hadn't had anything with anyone, and she seemed to realize that. "But you don't know how hard it is without male pleasure," she continued, her voice sounding almost wistful. "All the energy goes somewhere, so I just wanted you to know that. Someday you'll realize that." Her words made me feel uncomfortable, and I didn't know how to react. At this point, everything started happening so fast that I don't remember what was happening very well. My brain seemed to shut down for a while, and when it came back on, I found myself sitting next to a cheerful Aunt Helen. She was looking at me, her eyes bright as if nothing had happened. "Did you like the story?" she asked, her voice becoming playful again. I didn't know what to answer. I hesitantly nodded, my mind still trying to piece together what had just happened. Aunt Helen smiled at me and patted my shoulder as if to reassure me. She started talking about our next class, but my thoughts were somewhere else. I was still trying to make sense of it all. There was something unsettling about it all that I couldn't shake off, but Aunt Helen acted as if everything was perfectly normal, and I nodded, not knowing what else to do. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door, placing her hand lightly on my back. "I'll see you next week, Liam," she said cheerfully. I smiled weakly at her, still feeling confused and anxious. As I left, I couldn't help but think about the strange moments we had shared that day. There was something about Aunt Helen that I couldn't understand, a mystery that lingered in my mind long after I left her apartment.